Welcome back to Major Intonio's presentation of The Ifs of History by Joseph Edgar Chamberlin. Chapter 16, If James MacDonnel Had Not Closed the Gates of Hugomont Castle.
According to the Duke of Wellington himself, the success of the Allies at the Battle of Waterloo turned on an amazingly slight contingency, namely the closing of a gate or door of wood in the wall of a building. This fact was conclusively brought out when, years after the battle, an English clergyman, Reverend Mr. Narcross of Framlingham, died and left in his will the sum of £500 simply to the bravest man in England. The executors of the estate were completely nonplussed. Who was the bravest man in England? Doubtless many would have come forward gladly to claim the distinction and the legacy, but who was worthy of them? In their trouble, the executors applied to the Duke of Wellington for an answer to the question. The Iron Duke was not a man to be beaten by any question whatsoever, least of all by a military one. He went back a little in his recollections, until he came to the Battle of Waterloo. Then he wrote to the executors of the Framlingham parson that that battle was the greatest that had been fought in recent times. The success of it, he went on to say, turned upon the closing of the gates of Hugomont. These gates were closed in the most courageous manner, at the very nick of time, by Sir James MacDonnel, and he is the man to whom you should pay the £500. Thereupon the executors went to Sir James with the money, but he said to them, I cannot claim all the credit of closing the gates of Hugomont. My sergeant John Graham, seeing with me the importance of the step, rushed forward to help me, and by your leave I will share the legacy with him. The request was granted, and the fact was to this extent judicially established that Sir James MacDonnel and John Graham had closed the gates of Hugomont Castle, thereby settling the issue of the battle and the fate of Europe. Let us see what events hinged upon this act, and how they depended on it. The army with which the great Napoleon faced the miscellaneous assortment of British, Prussians, Hanoverians, Dutch, and Belgians at Waterloo was smaller than that of the Allies, but vastly more efficient as a whole. Most of the troops of the Allies were raw, and some of them were poor stuff indeed. Napoleon's soldiers were hardened, practiced, brave, and splendidly commanded. Napoleon had forced the Allies back at Quatre Bras. He captured their position at La Haye-Sainte. He perceived that the strategic key to the whole field of battle was the hill crowned by the old stone chateau of Hugomont. If that could be taken, Napoleon would be able to attack and turn Wellington's right flank. That accomplished, a junction of Blucher and his Prussians with the English would be prevented. The forces of the Allies would be split in two, and Napoleon would in all probability defeat them in detail, according to his time-honored method. The Emperor could easily have finished off the Austrians in their turn, as he planned to do, and the combined European attempt to oust him would have been frustrated. Thus the Corsican would have been, probably for so long as he lived, the master of France at the least, even if the checks he had already received had restricted his mastery of the rest of the continent. Knowing well that upon this cast his fate was staked, Napoleon hurled his best troops under Prince Jerome against the little old chateau on the hill. Again and again they assaulted it. 12,000 men were launched against the half-dilapidated castle, which had been pierced with loopholes for the British riflemen. And now and here came the crucial incident whose importance was rated so high by Wellington. At a moment when the chief defense of the chateau was entrusted to the Coldstream Guards, under Colonel James MacDonnell, the French were within a hair's breadth of taking it. They pushed against the gate of the castle, and had actually forced it open, when the Coldstream Guards charged out with their bayonets, forcing the advance rank of the French back a little. But the French were pouring up, and could no longer be held back at the point of the bayonet. It was at this instant, when a slight leeway had been gained, that Colonel MacDonnell and Sergeant Graham, under a galling fire from the French, stepped forward and with their own hands closed the chateau gates, barricaded them, and thus enabled the troops to resume their fierce rifle fire from within. After this the French made many more assaults on the heavy gates, but could not force them open again. Wellington, meanwhile, commanded a general advance. Following a fresh repulse of the French onset, and the French line was thrown into confusion. He knew that Blucher was now at hand. It was by this time 7:30 in the evening to support him. Blucher indeed arrived and attacked and crushed the broken French right, forcing Napoleon to retreat in disorder. Thus was completed the victory which the heroic defense of Hugomont had made possible. The crushing of the British right wing on this occasion, had Napoleon been able thus to effect it, would have reversed a vast deal of history. It is not necessary to take an extreme view of the situation to realize this. On the immediate field, the British, Dutch, and Hanoverians must have been forced back upon Brussels, and Blucher would have been unable to maintain a front against the French. Even if the remnants of the Allied armies had escaped and made another stand, Napoleon must instantly have regained a degree of prestige and position that would have enabled him to consolidate his power at home and make excellent terms abroad. Even after Leipzig, when he had seemed to be utterly beaten, the powers had been willing to give him France's natural frontiers, namely the Rhine, the Alps, and the Pyrenees. It is likely that Leipzig and Elba had already taught the emperor wisdom, which would have deterred him from attempting to carry the boundaries of his domain once more to the Baltic, or to parcel out the rest of Europe among his relatives and dependents. But within the frontiers I have named, and west of the Rhine, he must have remained impregnable, and all the momentous consequences which resulted from his defeat must have been thwarted and turned aside. Out of the victory of the Allies at Waterloo came, first, the banishment and early death of Napoleon Bonaparte, the placing of Louis XVIII on the throne of France, the complete subduing of the Revolution, the creation of the joint kingdom of Holland and Belgium, which meant the modern intensely industrialized Belgian state, and Leopold and the Congo, the aggrandizement and lasting leadership of Prussia in Germany, the foundation of the modern Italy through the annexation of the Genoese Republic to the Piedmont Kingdom, the enlargement of Switzerland by 3 cantons taken from France, the taking of Norway from Denmark and its bestowal upon Sweden, the absorption of what was left of Poland by Russia, and some other reparceling of territory in an arbitrary sense, which has nevertheless for the most part endured. There is scarcely a political articulation in Europe today which does not date from Waterloo. New tendencies still operate which had their inception then. Indirectly, the consequences were momentous. The aggrandizement of Prussia prepared the way for the unification of Germany and the gradual atrophy of Austria as a German state. As I have said, the enlargement of Piedmont foretokened a united Italy, and built up another power which has contributed to the enforced shrinkage of Austria. The two great constructive European statesmen of the 19th century, Bismarck and Cavour, were both the children of Waterloo. All these tendencies might have been working just the other way if Colonel MacDonnell had not succeeded in closing the chateau gates. Yet more still was in store. Moral and intellectual consequences of greater moment, perhaps, than the political results impended. The victory of the Allies was followed by a period of severe repression of popular tendencies in Europe. The Holy Alliance, which became a league of continental monarchs against liberal ideas, was a direct consequence. It inaugurated reaction everywhere, and reaction bred in its turn new and insidious radicalisms. Lassalle, Marx, Saint-Simon and Fourier, socialists and Bakunin and Proudhon, first of the anarchists, were the offspring of the Holy Alliance, nurtured in the dark corners of repression's jail. The course of events in Europe would have been far otherwise indeed if Napoleon's veterans, forcing their way into Hugomont and splitting the British strength in two, had prepared the way for a long lease of the power of that adroit and calculating master, who knew so well how to meet popular demands and still hold his personal sway. In its practical expression, his system was liberal. Every peasant proprietor in France today holds his acres by virtue of Napoleonic legislation. That does not mean that all would have been good in France. Far from that. A strange falsity, a theatric insincerity, lay beneath all the Napoleonic sentiments and ideals. These qualities color the thought of France still. Will she ever be able to escape them? These tendencies would have been many times more powerful if Napoleon had entrenched himself upon the throne. More than that, they must have passed to other countries. The shadow of his eagles might lie athwart even our America, his insidious ideas expressing themselves in our politics and our intellectual and moral life, if that moment's vast contingency had gone Napoleon's way at Waterloo.
This concludes today's reading of the Ifs of History, by Joseph Edgar Chamberlin. Join us also next Sunday for the subsequent part. Subscribe to Major Intonio's channel. Thank you for listening, and so long.